it's sort of think tank language, isn't it? It's looking at things in quite sort of black and white. And I mean, it's something that's plagued the Tory party for years, is this sort of this perspective that it might be a little bit too declinist. I did think actually it was rather curious that Mr. Zahawi said that Liz Truss will overturn stale economic orthodoxy and run the economy along conservative principles, which I thought was a bit of an odd line to take, all things considered. But realistically, I think that's the key thing, is that Liz Truss is offering the closest thing actually to what Boris Johnson offered, which is possibilities. Liz Truss isn't sitting there and saying, we can't do this, we can't do that. And that's very much what Sunak is saying. Liz Truss is, talking about, before today at the very least, she was the one that was talking about the largest tax cut. She was talking about things that I think people want to hear, a little bit more optimism. On the one hand, I think that is sensible of your Liz Truss, because you need a way to sort of appeal to people, that sort of constituency that Boris Johnson was able to get at the last general election, which includes sort of Labour voters, and they want sort of big ticket items that they can really get behind. Same with Brexit. That was, again, it was about voting for possibilities, not for the status quo. The only thing I think that might cause a little bit of caution, or should sound a little bit of caution, is the fact that I think Rishi Sunak is being a little bit doomster, if we were going to be a little bit unfair, partly because the British economy is in the state that it is for reasons that are slightly beyond the short-term control of government. So I don't think that this malaise that we find ourselves in is necessarily something that can be solved with overnight tax cuts. I mean, that might give a little bit of respite to people, a little bit of a reprieve in their pockets. But I don't think that this is simply a case of saying, what we need is lower taxes, don't put up corporation tax. What we need is entirely, sort of go along the sort of the free market think tank route. Ultimately, what the country needs is reinforcement in key areas, key industries, things like house building, things like power, and these things actually will require, I would have thought, quite a lot of government intervention, quite a lot of government spending. And I think that's possibly, if you're Rishi Sunak, you're sat there going, yes, I'd quite like to be able to slash taxes, but right now, when things are, we are at the mercy of global waves, it's not necessarily the moment to do it.
Of course, what some of those free marketeers might say is actually what's getting in the way of house building is too much government regulation rather than not enough government involvement. But Richard Johnson, let's pick up on this point about whether or not Liz Truss is Borisian in tone or indeed in policy, because boosterism does seem to be very Boris-like. However, Liz Truss has made this whole campaign about breaking with the economic orthodoxy of the last 20 years, including, of course, the last 3 years under Boris Johnson.
If you look at the reason why this leadership contest came about, it wasn't really about a rejection of policies from the government, possibly a sense of a lack of direction or a lack of policies, but not really people rebelling against a particular policy and say there was this pushback against Thatcher for her Euroscepticism in 1990. In many ways, the issue really came down to the person of the Prime Minister, and I think Rishi Sunak thought that would be enough to present himself as, he's kind of the man of integrity. Tough claim when he was also fined in the Partygate story. I think, Liz Truss is trying to present herself as someone who's pro-economic stimulus, but also she's pulling on the heartstrings of the Conservatives with some of her kind of symbolic throwbacks to Thatcher and the way that she's been, trying to make comparisons with her, not so subtly in this contest. So she knows, I think, where the heart and soul of the current Conservative Party is.
It's interesting, that point. Let's pick this up with Benedict Spence, because to some extent the received wisdom was that this toppling of Boris Johnson came about because of the way that he acted personally, because of personal failings, perhaps even moral failings in Number 10. Although, looking at the way that this race has developed, to some extent, perhaps it is more about policy than we had all thought. Perhaps if the economy had been going gangbusters, if Conservatives were placated with not the highest tax burden in 70 years, with perhaps tax cuts and deregulation, and actually using that enormous majority to do Conservative things, perhaps Boris Johnson would have got away more with some personal failings.
I mean, it's a curious one because I think an awful lot of what enabled Boris Johnson to hang on for quite as long as he did was the fact that it was Boris Johnson and he'd spent 20 years cultivating this sort of impregnable image that I know a lot of people in London didn't quite understand, but actually a lot of people in the broader country quite did. Also, I think a lot of people, certainly in the former Labour constituencies, were not opposed necessarily to greater state intervention, especially during the pandemic. But I think, Liz Truss is sort of swinging for the fence here. She's going gangbusters, I suppose, for the membership and hoping that in 2 years the state of the economy will improve with her interventions, with her policies, enough to win over the rest of the country. Because my big fear, I think, for Liz Truss right now is that she is, I said that she was a big ticket, sort of big policy kind of person like Boris Johnson. But as you say, she is slightly the inverse of Boris Johnson in that she wants to reduce the size of the state. She needs to win over those people in that so-called fabled red wall, that this is actually the way forward. If she manages to do that, then it'll have been a magnificent gamble. But I think that's where you're right, Rishi Sunak's belief that carrying on sort of business as usual, what Boris Johnson was offering would be enough. It's clearly not enough with the Tory members. And that's what you need to win over right now. That's why Rishi Sunak has come out with the policy today about reducing the rate of income tax to 16%. Fantastic with the Tory members. I'm sure it would be very good with the country, but you need to get to the country first. And up until now, Rishi Sunak has, I think, been playing more to the general public than the party. And I think that has really hindered him, frankly, and I think it is partly what's going to see him lose this race.